Hello, everybody. The question for today, how will synagogues reinvent themselves? Hey everybody, Rabbi David here, your Torah tech guy, and I'm here on Torah Tech Tips, where I strive to share with you great tech for your great Torah. But today's going to be a little different because today I'm actually not really going to talk so much about tech, certainly not specific tools, but instead I want to look at an article that came out on November 4th called How Will Synagogues Reinvent Themselves? Now, that title is fantastic, but when you get into the subtitle, you'll see why I wanted to address this. So the article is, How Will Synagogues Reinvent Themselves? Hint, it won't be with Zoom. And then down below here, it says, synagogues can and should become the communal antidote to everything virtual. They should be the source, the last bastion of real human connections. Now, I thought when I first saw this article, by the way, this is in the Jewish Journal, from November 4th. The author is David Suissa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. When I first saw this, I thought, oh, this is going to make me frustrated. I'm going to get frustrated with this. As it turns out, there's a lot in here that I really agree with. So what I wanted to do is just kind of walk through it with you. I highlighted a few pieces, and then I made some notes for myself that I want to share with you. And I'd love to hear what you think. So throw it in the comments, either during the live stream or afterward. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this. So he starts by sort of acknowledging what is going on in our world and that this isn't new, the significant changes that we're seeing in the life of the synagogue. But then he says that seemingly overnight, COVID fears and restrictions have significantly lowered the perceived value of the synagogue experience. It's true that this trend was prevalent before COVID. Much has been written in recent years about the need to revitalize the traditional synagogue model, but the pandemic has dramatically accelerated that trend. Now, I think he's absolutely right there, that a lot of the extras, so when I talk about extras, what I'm talking about is kiddush, the kids running around in the hallway, reconnecting with friends, hanging out outside of the sanctuary. I remember when I was a kid growing up, that the best times I had were not when I was in the sanctuary, but when I was hanging outside of the sanctuary. A lot of those are missing in digital space. He's absolutely right about that. And what I think that's done, though, is it's brought to the forefront how desperately our services and our offerings need a breath of fresh air. And so many of us are doing that. I have I'll call him a teacher. He's a colleague he's not a colleague, I'm nowhere near him, but in the digital live streaming, in that world. And he talks about going to conferences and how people went to conferences not because of the keynotes, but despite them. People went to conferences because of the coffee talk, because of the water cooler talk, because of all of that good stuff. And they endured the keynotes and the presentations. Now that everything's digital and we don't have all those extras, we're realizing how terrible those keynotes were. And I'm not going to suggest that services were terrible, but I would suggest that we might be learning how we need to up our game, since we don't have a lot of those extras. He goes on to say, the extraordinary convenience of online services has increased virtual attendance, but it has also discouraged in-person attendance. Now, you all know how I feel about the words virtual and in-person. There is nothing virtual going on in what we're doing. It is as real as it gets. And the people who participate with us in digital space are very much in person. They're just in digital space. How many of these comfortable souls will return to synagogue even after COVID is officially behind us and they no longer need to pray with a mask? So I'm a little more interested in a different question. And my question is, how can we ensure that the sanctuary, that prayer, and that learning remains in our congregants' homes? This moment has given us what we all were yearning for decades. How do we get people to live Jewishly in their homes? Well, guess what? They're doing it now by necessity. They're doing it. So I would love for people to come back to the sanctuary. I'm not against that at all. Absolutely. I want to come back to the sanctuary. I also want us to make sure that when we bring them back into the sanctuary, we're not dragging their Judaism along with them. I want that to stay out in people's homes and in their lives. He goes on, at what point does reduced attendance and reduced memberships become decisive issues that must be addressed? Put more bluntly, at what point does a sanctuary become too empty and a building become too big for the people that it is serving? Well, this question may have been forced upon us by COVID, but smaller synagogues have been struggling and wrestling with this question for well over a decade. So this to me is not a new question. Maybe it's been accelerated, but I think it's not necessarily anything really new. All right, the good news, he says, and my only comment to this is yes, yes, yes. He says, the good news, we're going through a golden age of Jewish learning. Advances in digital technology have opened up an enormous educational vista for anyone with an iPhone or an Android. I'm an Android guy. Just as the convenience of online has hampered in-person attendance, on-site attendance, I would say, it has also led to arguably the greatest surge in Jewish learning in our history. That, I think, is absolutely true, and I hope that that's something that continues. When your audience is unlimited around the globe, it's easy to forget your audience down the block. This is a really interesting point. I think he's right. I think there is a fear, a concern, that if we imagine our congregation is the whole world, which it is now, that we may forget about the people who live right down the block, right? We might forget about the homegrown, local community that we're trying to build up. I think he's right about that. I also think there's an antidote. I think the antidote is don't push out content. Instead, develop and nurture relationships in digital space. That's how you get this done. Yes, you're right. It is very difficult to connect with people in meaningful ways in digital space when you're on YouTube, when you're just broadcasting on YouTube or Facebook. But if you spend time developing real relationships with people, and I can only speak from my own experience over the past year and a half, 2 years, I've developed some really meaningful relationships with people I've never seen in person. That can exist. And you can recreate, to a certain extent, that hometown feel, even though your audience is all over the world. Let's see, what else do we have here? In addition to what they usually offer, synagogues can do more to celebrate the whole Jewish buffet from philosophy. So he's talking here about how synagogues might need to, again, reinvent themselves and change. Synagogues need to do more to celebrate the whole Jewish buffet from philosophy to history to poetry, arts, literature, music, and film. These items represent different entry points to one's Jewish identity. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yes, 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 yes. It seems to me that that's what the JCC movement has been striving to do. How's that working out? Now, maybe having that space in a synagogue will be a better platform. I don't know. I think he's right that we need to broaden our offerings and certainly offer more of what people are looking for. I'm not sure if we want to become JCCs. I don't know. All right, let's keep going. Just a couple more. He says here, now he's talking about how we might shift specifically around learning and prayer for on-site gatherings, in person in his language. And he says that includes taking advantage of the great outdoors, which is now a part of the new normal. It is, and thank goodness for warm climates. I'm doing like everything outdoors now, and it is so lovely. And I think that part of the beauty that being outdoors when you can, obviously if you're in the Northeast at this time of year and later, it's very, very difficult. But when you can, being outdoors, is it brings that sort of campy feel to what you're doing. And we've known for decades that Jewish camps are some of the best experiences to help people feel connected, deeply connected to their Judaism. All right. Now I'm going to start getting frustrated. We cannot, now that the world is reopening, he writes, we can't allow the virtual space to keep us isolated. Well, I'm not sure that I feel all that isolated in digital space. When digital engagement is done really, really well, it isn't isolating. It's connecting. It's liberating. In fact, I was talking with some friends this morning, and they were saying that there's more intimacy when we're up close in these Zoom boxes than if I'm the rabbi and I'm standing on the bima and the congregation is way out in Yechopitzville in the pews. That there's more intimacy in this kind of a setting. So I just fundamentally don't buy into the idea that virtual space keeps us isolated. Synagogues can and should become the communal antidote to everything virtual. This is what we read at the very top. They should be the source, the last bastion of real human connections. All right, let's take this apart here, because this approach to me is defeatist. It isn't either or. No one is suggesting that we should never see one another on site, in person, face-to-face, whatever, again. What we're saying is that the best online Jewish experiences, and the best online Jewish communal experiences should exist side and side with a place for physical gatherings that help us stay connected in other ways. They each serve their own purpose. One is not here to replace the other, but one is here to allow us to connect, to grow, to nurture relationships and Judaism and Torah in different ways. Why would we not want to embrace that? All right, do I have anything else here? I think I got one more. Oh yeah, this is the big one. All right, ready? Here we go. When the Second Temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago, our religion went through another earthquake. Our most prized piece of real estate, the place that kept us together and connected to our Creator, went up in flames. I can only imagine, by the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, I put the link to this article in the down below in the description so you can read it on your own. I can only imagine that in the wake of that disaster, it must have been difficult for our ancestors to see any hope. How could they? The concrete core of their tradition was ripped apart. He's right. We overcame that destruction by being creative, resourceful and resilient, and by focusing not on real estate, but on soul estate. We carried the holiness and rituals of the temple with us throughout the diaspora, in our homes, our Shabbat tables, and in our houses of prayer and learning. We survived by staying connected to our tradition and to one another. Amen. Absolutely. The problem is that this analogy argues squarely against the author's main point. The rabbis didn't, when the temple was destroyed, the rabbis did not go back right away and build another temple. They, in fact, very thoughtfully and methodically shifted us away from sacred space. Shameless plug. You ready for a shameless plug? Hold on. I have a whole book about this. It's called The Search for the Sacred, where I talk about how after the destruction of the Second Temple, the rabbis moved, but that was embarrassing, the rabbis moved from sacred space to sacred time. So in response to the destruction of the temple, they shifted where Judaism lived from space to time, from sanctuaries to Shabbat, from pulpits to prayer. So why in this moment, when we don't have access to our physical spaces, would we argue that they are our savior? That the very thing that we don't have access to right now, that has been destroyed by the pandemic, although it hasn't been destroyed, that we want to run back and rebuild that in lieu of anything else. Of course we should rebuild them, but in lieu of anything else? Should we not find other ways to build communities, he says, to stay connected to our tradition and to one another? Of course we should. Of course we should. So at the end of the day, I want to encourage you to read this article. I think it's an important article. I think he makes some really interesting arguments. You can find it online at jewishjournal.com. I have the link down below. I have some real arguments with him on some of this stuff, but I think it's a worthwhile read. And as all of us think about how we're going to reinvent our own synagogues, because they are going to require reinvention, no matter what happens. We are in a moment of reinvention. We are at a Yochanan ben Zakkai moment. We're at who else? Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the guy, right? Who sort of helped us reinvent Judaism after the destruction of the Second Temple with Yavne. This is a moment. This is a moment. how are we going to reinvent ourselves and our communities? Speaking of reinvention and this moment, I want to encourage you to join me on Mondays. Oh my Lord, I've had the most wonderful conversations. This past week I was with Rabbi Elise Wechterman. This coming Monday at 5 o'clock, I'm going to be with Rabbi Dan Judson, an old friend of mine from Massachusetts. He's at Hebrew College. I'm so excited to talk to him. And I have an amazing lineup for December and into January as well. So please do join me there. You can find that at TorahTechGuy.tv, and you can, of course, find all of my resources, everything I have available. If you want to reach out, get some help, go to www.TorahTechGuy.com. I'm here for you. I'm happy to help you, and really looking forward to meeting you. Tomorrow, I've got another how-to, and then next week on Torah Tech Tips, I've got a cool new toy that I want to show you. It's a nice little tip. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day. See you tomorrow. Bye.